Welcome to Scuba Visions TV, and today instead of our usual dive in one of my favorite dive sites, what we're going to do is we have the honor of having John Hanzl here, who's the dive safety officer from the New England Aquarium. John is also the author of a new action-adventure novel entitled Out of Hell's Kitchen. Welcome, John.
Thank you for having me here.
It's a pleasure. So you're a busy guy.
I seem to be fairly busy.
But yet you found time to write a novel now?
I did manage to write an action-adventure novel entitled Out of Hell's Kitchen, and I'm very proud of it.
So Luke's got quite a collection of interesting friends, and one of the other primary characters in the novel is one of these friends. His name is Jit, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about him, because I found him pretty fascinating, pretty interesting guy.
Well, Jit, his name is actually Jeremiah Ingram Thomas. He's another Brit, and he comes from a family from Tobago, in Trinidad area. And he sort of has this Medusa snarl of hair and a very feline expression on his face, and these kind of craggly teeth, and is kind of somebody who he speaks before he thinks quite often, and sometimes that gets him into trouble. But he actually, on many levels, is modeled after one of my best friends for a very long time, who has the same style of personality, and I felt like he was a great sort of a counterpart to Luke. They can really bounce things off each other, have different takes, and just different sets of experiences. So he actually does come from a friend of mine whose name was Peter.
So how much of Luke comes from John Hanzl?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, very little, because I think Luke is definitely far cooler than I am. My goal, and I decided to set out to prove myself either correct or incorrect, that I can at least do as well in writing a novel like this as some of these published authors, and to make sure that everything I write about was based on fact, that every single thing that happens could actually happen or has happened to somebody in real life. Therefore, of course, Luke, a lot of the things he talks about, he's experienced or he has had experience in his past, were things that have happened to me. So I definitely knew at least a little bit about each thing Luke was talking. But I've not to give away too much, but I've been in a motorcycle accident, crushed my left leg. I've rock climbing and skydiving, and certainly scuba diving. I've done a lot of interesting traveling on boats and to different countries and very remote places, and I'm working at wrapping a lot of those experiences up into Luke's own experiences.
How did you come up with the storyline?
Well, basically, as I said before, I think that some of it came up with itself. I ripped some of the features of the book from current headlines, meaning that, like I said, I want to make sure that this is all based on reality, that there's nothing implausible about it. But I also wanted to set up a situation where these central characters, Luke and Jit, as you mentioned before, Jit, can live on in sequels, because I think that's something that I've always enjoyed reading in action adventures is you finish a novel, but you're not done with the characters. You like the characters, you invested some time in reading about these guys, so you want to sort of read some more in a future novel or a whole series of novels. So when I set this whole thing up, I set it up in my head as a series of stories based on this central set of characters. At the same time, I actually had people in my life. I mentioned that one of my best friends sort of is the model for Jit. I had a few other people in my life, including my wife, who were sort of people I used as sort of outline sketches for some of the characters in the book. I won't actually say who my wife, which character is based on her, but people who read it might be able to figure that out, at least people who know me. And so I like to, once again, keep things real, but also I like to have some parallel development of stories. So actually there's 2 or 3 stories that actually happen that are sort of interwoven in this book, and then of course come to a connection towards the latter half. And I like that because I don't like things always happening in sequence, because it becomes A, a little predictable, and B, it tends to not leave you wanting more. So I like to be able to switch between stories a little bit, so that the reader's like, oh, I want to know what happens with this guy, but now I'm going to read this and I'm going to get invested in that, and then I'll switch back. and with any luck, people will agree with my writing style.
You included the first chapter of the sequel, Into the Devil's Throat. Does this mean we're going to expect to see more of Luke and Jit then?
Well, that was definitely the hook. Now, I'm not going to tell you who you're going to see more of, but there's definitely going to be, the story will continue, and the characters, some of the characters will continue as well. There's a lot going to happen in Into the Devil's Throat, but that'll be for maybe another interview.
Excellent. Well, okay, I have to ask the question. I'm not going to give away the story, but can you tell us what happens to Luke at the end?
I don't know what you're talking about.
All right. The other question I have to ask is, are we going to see more of Max Into the Devil's Throat?
Well, Max is one of those characters that I was very excited to create, and I have a sneaking suspicion that not only will you see more of Max, but you'll see some interesting other characters that I've already created in outline form that we haven't even touched upon, that will interact both with some of the folks in this book, including Max, and some new people that I'm going to be introducing as well.
Well, Max was one of my favorite characters, albeit a late addition to the cast and crew in Out of Hell's Kitchen.
I'm glad you like Max. Yeah, I was very excited for that character to come into play.
So here's the key question. I think you've already mentioned it, but why don't you tell us once again where people can buy the book?
Well, thank you for bringing that up. Certainly, it's a very key, for me, a very key question. If you're in the Boston area and you want to actually go and put your hands on the book and take a look at it, I would recommend you go to Barnes & Noble at the Prudential Center. But if you're not local, you can certainly find it on Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. There's a bunch of other online sites that I've never even heard of that I've noticed are carrying the title as well. And you can actually go to any bookstore anywhere in the country and ask for this book, and they will be able to order it for you. They can look it up on their Ingram database and order it for you.
So, and I think you mentioned earlier that if you go to the www.outofhellskitchen.com website, there are links that people can use to find ways to buy the book also?
Yep, it's basically your one-stop shopping for this book, where you can browse the book a little bit, and you can read about the author if you're interested, look at some pictures, and certainly link over to Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com to make the purchase. I try to make it easy for people.
Excellent. Well, John, thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate you coming on Scuba Visions TV.
It's been my pleasure.
And we hope to see you again when Into the Devil's Throat gets published.
I look forward to it. Thank you, Don.
Right.